He was the king of New York. They called him the Ghost of Manhattan, a man who commanded armies with nothing but a whisper. But on a rainy Tuesday night, Dante Caruso was not the shadow that made the city tremble. He was just another bleeding man dying on the floor of a cheap diner. Dozens of people stepped over him. They saw the blood pooling beneath his body. They saw the expensive suit ruined by gutter water, and they looked away. They did not want trouble. He was seconds from death, ready to accept that loyalty was nothing but a beautiful lie. Then a waitress with tired eyes and a stained apron, a woman with faded scars circling her wrists like forgotten shackles, dropped a tray of coffee, knelt beside him, and whispered the only words that could save his life in a dialect only the highest-ranking Mafia families were supposed to know. That one sentence did not just save him. It ignited a war. If you want to know what she whispered and how a broken waitress became the queen of the underworld, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. Because in this world, blood is never washed with water. It is washed with blood. Let us turn back time 30 minutes before that fateful moment. Rain poured down on New York City as if the sky itself were emptying its rage onto wandering souls. The neon sign of Max's all-night diner flickered weakly in the darkness. Its red-orange glow spilled onto the soaked sidewalk and pooled there like diluted blood. Dante Caruso staggered out of the dark alley behind the abandoned warehouse. His left hand was clamped to his right side. Warm blood slipped through his fingers, mixed with the rain, and fell onto the asphalt in pale pink drops. Every step was a torment. Every breath was a blade cutting into his chest. He leaned against the brick wall and left a long smear of blood across its mossy surface. The memory of what had just happened looped in his mind like a damaged film reel. The warehouse, the sickly yellow light, Victor standing behind him. The gunshot, not from an enemy but from the man he trusted most, his cousin, his underboss. Victor's gaze was so cold that Dante could still feel it now, colder even than the bullet that had torn through his flesh. He pushed open the heavy glass door of the diner. The bell rang with a cheerful chime that felt cruel beside his slow dying. The diner at 2 a.m. was a graveyard of broken dreams. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with forgotten bacon on a pan, and the dirty linoleum floor, wiped with cheap cleanser. The ceiling fan turned slowly, as if counting down the last seconds of a fading soul. The fluorescent lights flickered and cast blinking shadows across the faces inside. Dante staggered in and gripped the counter to keep from falling. Tommy Flanagan, the owner, a middle-aged man with grease stains on his shirt like a map of distant lands, looked up from his horse racing paper. His eyes slid over Dante. He saw the sweat on his brow, the corpse-pale skin, the way he leaned to the left, and most of all he saw trouble. In this neighborhood, a bleeding man in an expensive suit meant police. And police meant questions Tommy couldn't answer about the illegal gambling room in the back. "Help me," Dante whispered. His voice was like a broken engine. "I need a phone." Tommy looked at him and shook his head. "The phone's broken, pal. The kitchen's closed, too. Get out of here before I call the cops." Dante searched the room for a compassionate glance, a helping hand. The truck driver in the corner buried his face deeper in his paper as if the words could shield him from reality. The young couple arguing in the booth fell silent and stared at Dante with wide, frightened eyes before looking back down at their cold fries. No one moved. The bystander effect worked perfectly. They saw a man dying, but they filed him away as a drunk or a junkie. Not their problem. Dante's knees buckled. He slid down the counter and hit the linoleum with a heavy thud. "Jesus Christ," Tommy muttered as he came around the counter, not to help but to drag him outside. "I just mopped the floor." Dante's vision blurred. The ceiling fan kept turning. It was counting down the last seconds of his life. He felt the cold hand of death reaching for him, and he cursed his own legacy. He was Dante Caruso, the Ghost of Manhattan, Capo dei Capi, and he was about to die beside a gumball machine, kicked into the street by a greasy cook. How many people had he killed? How many souls had left this world by his command? And now, none of them were here to save him. "Maledetti vigliacchi," he whispered. The Sicilian slipped from his lips in delirium. "You miserable cowards. I will kill you all." A whisper meant for God or the devil. But someone heard it. In the narrow kitchen behind the diner, Olivia Brennan was scrubbing a stack of dirty plates in a basin of steaming hot water. Her hands were rough from soap and detergent, her nails cut down to the quick. She was 27 years old, but her eyes were far older than her age, deep as a moonless night sea, holding secrets no one wished to know. Her black hair was tied messily at the nape of her neck, a few strands clinging to her sweat-damp forehead. On her wrist, faint scars circled like forgotten chains, but no one noticed them, No one noticed her, and that was exactly what she wanted. The sound of the bell made her lift her head. Through the small glass window between the kitchen and the counter, she saw a man stagger inside. An expensive suit, the posture of someone used to giving orders. And blood soaking through black fabric, blood dripping onto the floor, the blood of a dying boss. Olivia kept washing the dishes, but her eyes never left him for a second. She watched Tommy refuse to help. She watched the customers turn away. She watched him collapse to the floor like a fallen empire. Then she heard it. Maledetti Vigliacchi, Sicilian. Not the kind tourists learned from guidebooks. This was the dialect of Corleone, of the villages where the Mafia was born, of families that had ruled the shadows for centuries. In that moment, her grandmother's voice rang in her mind like a bell from the past. Remember this, my girl. These incantations are the keys that open every door in the underworld. Never forget them, and never use them unless you are ready to trade everything. Olivia looked down at her hands. 15 years. 15 years of waiting. 15 years of searching. And now the opportunity walked into the cheap diner where she worked. She took the coffee tray from the counter and walked out with a calm face. Then she deliberately let the tray slip from her hands. The crash of breaking porcelain rang out sharply. Hot coffee splashed across the floor. Every eye turned toward her for a single instant, long enough for Tommy to stop dragging the stranger toward the door. Olivia rushed toward Dante as if she had just realized something. She knelt beside him, her knees touching the warm pool of blood. Her rough hands lifted his head, and she leaned close to his ear, her lips almost brushing his skin. Il sangue non si lava con l'acqua, Don Caruso, she whispered, her voice like a blade cutting through the noise of the diner. Il sangue si lava con il sangue. Blood is not washed with water. Blood is washed with blood. Dante's eyes flew open, fighting the darkness swallowing him. He looked at her, at eyes deep as a night sea, at the faint scars on her wrist, at the face of a woman who should not know those words. Who? He whispered. Be quiet, Olivia answered in flawless English without an accent. She looked up at Tommy approaching. Rebecca, leave him alone. I'm throwing him out. Olivia slapped Tommy's hand away with a fierceness that made the large man step back. This is my uncle, she said, her voice cold as ice. He has diabetes. He's in shock. Help me get him to the car, Tommy, or I swear to God I'll call the tax inspector to ask about your undeclared income, and while I'm at it, I'll also tell the police about the gambling room in the storage area out back. Tommy went pale. A threat to his livelihood weighed more than fear of a bleeding man. All right. Get him out of here. Olivia pulled Dante to his feet. She was a head shorter than him, but she had a wiry, desperate strength. She wrapped his arm over her shoulder and took his weight. As they staggered out the back door into the dark alley, where the rain was still falling, Olivia felt his weak breath against her neck. She had waited 15 years for this moment. 15 years since the night her father fell. 15 years since her sister died in her arms. 15 years of living in the shadows, waiting, watching, planning. And now the prey had walked into the trap on its own. The old Honda Civic screeched as Olivia hit the gas, shooting out of the dark alley and merging into the thin midnight traffic of New York City. The car smelled of cheap vanilla perfume, the scent she used to mask the damp rot of the peeling leather seats and the floor mats soaked with rain from countless nights like this. Dante lay slumped in the passenger seat, one hand clutching the bundle of bar rags Olivia had stuffed into his wound, the other gripping the door handle as if it were the last rope tying him to the world of the living. Streetlights slid across his face, yellow, then orange, then red, like candles in a funeral rite. The hospital, he murmured, his voice breaking. Take me to the hospital. No, Olivia said, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. You have a bullet inside you. The hospital will call the police. The police will call it in. And the man who put that bullet in you probably owns half the cops in this city. You can't go to a hospital. Dante tried to open his eyes and focus on the stone-cold face of the woman driving. She knew too much. A normal waitress didn't say things like that. A normal waitress didn't know Sicilian dialect. A normal waitress wasn't this terrifyingly calm, sitting next to a bleeding mafia boss. Who are you? He asked. But his voice was so weak the words dissolved into the sound of rain tapping on the windshield. Olivia didn't answer. She tightened her grip on the wheel until her knuckles turned white, and in that moment her mind drifted to another rainy night, 15 years earlier. She was 12 years old, asleep in her small room with butterfly wallpaper. Then her father's voice. Wake up, sweetheart. Hurry. We have to go. He carried Lily in his arms, her 7-year-old sister still half asleep, clutching a worn stuffed bear. He grabbed Olivia's hand and pulled her through the back door into the night. Rain poured down as if the sky were crying for what was about to happen. Then the shadows appeared, men in long coats. Her father pushed her and Lily into a corner and stepped in front of them, shielding them with his body. The gunshot. A single sound, but enough to change everything. Her father fell. Blood splashed onto Olivia's face, hot and metallic on her lips. She screamed. Lily wailed. And before darkness swallowed her, Olivia saw the face of the man holding the gun. Young, ambitious, cold, eyes without mercy. Then strange hands dragged her and her sister into the dark, into hell, into 15 years of waiting. A car horn ahead snapped Olivia back to the present. She blinked and pushed the memory back into the dark drawer of her mind where she had locked it for years. Dante was watching her in the passing streetlight, his eyes trying and failing to read her. "Who are you?" he asked again. Olivia still didn't answer. She turned into a narrow street, then another, as if deliberately trying to lose herself inside her own maze. At last the car stopped in front of a crumbling brick building in Queens, walls stained with damp, a rusted fire escape, a hallway light flickering weakly like the breath of someone dying. Olivia turned off the engine and stared straight ahead without looking at him. "You can trust me or die in the street," she said flatly without emotion. "Choose. 4 flights of stairs. 4 levels of hell." Each step was a mountain Dante had to climb with a will that was nearly spent. Olivia supported him, her shoulder bearing almost all his weight. Yet she didn't complain. The stairwell walls were stained with damp and mold, the smell of urine and old smoke clinging to the air like ghosts of poverty. The hallway lights flickered, and at times they moved in complete darkness, with only Dante's ragged breathing and the echo of their footsteps in the narrow space. By the time they reached the 4th floor, Dante was nearly unconscious, his feet dragging more than walking. Olivia unlocked apartment 4B with one hand while the other still held him. She pushed the door open and pulled him inside. The studio apartment was tiny, perhaps no more than 30 square meters, yet surprisingly clean. A single bed was pressed into the corner, its white sheets smoothed flat without a single wrinkle. A kitchenette barely large enough for one person stood there with a gleaming stainless steel sink and a few pots hung neatly above it. There was no television. There were no luxury decorations. Only embroidered pictures on the wall, flowers and birds, careful stitches forming crimson rose petals and the wings of a lark in flight, the only color in the gray room. Olivia lowered Dante onto the worn sofa upholstered in beige fabric that was frayed in places. Without a word, she went into the kitchen and returned with a cheap bottle of vodka, a sewing kit, a pair of tweezers, and a lighter. She knelt beside him and tore his shirt open, the buttons scattering across the floor. When she saw the wound, she didn't flinch. The bullet had passed through his side, missing vital organs but tearing through a large muscle. Blood was still seeping out, soaking red into the sofa lining beneath him. "This will hurt," Olivia said in a voice as calm as a weather report. Then she poured vodka onto the wound. Dante roared, his back arching off the sofa, the pain white and absolute as if someone had lit a fire inside his flesh. He clenched his teeth until they felt ready to shatter, but he didn't scream. A boss doesn't scream, not even when he's dying. Olivia worked with hands as steady as an experienced surgeon. She held the tweezers in the lighter's flame, then used them to pull out bits of dirty fabric from the wound, one piece at a time, precise, without trembling. Then she threaded the needle and began to stitch the wound with the same care she used on the flowers on the wall. The needle pierced flesh, the thread pulled through, a knot tied, again and again. Dante watched her through the sweat streaming down his forehead, precise, cold, without a trace of hesitation, as if she had done this hundreds of times. "You have good hands," Dante panted. "Where did you learn to stitch bullet wounds?" "Growing up where people don't go to hospitals," Olivia replied without looking up. She tied the final knot, cut the thread, and covered the wound with a clean bandage cut from a white handkerchief. "It's done," she said as she stood and turned her back to him to wash the blood from her hands in the small sink. And that was when Dante saw. As she reached for the tap, her shirt lifted slightly, revealing part of her back. Long scars ran across it in parallel lines, like railroad tracks leading to hell. Not scars from an accident, not scars from surgery. These were whip scars, the scars of torture, the scars of years in captivity. Dante Caruso had seen countless wounds in his life. He had caused more wounds than he could count, but this was the first time he saw a scar and felt something other than curiosity. Something like anger, something like pain, something he had buried long ago and thought he'd never feel again. A heavy silence settled over the apartment like a blanket woven from untold secrets. Olivia pulled her shirt down, but it was too late. She knew he had seen. She could feel his gaze burning into her back where the scars lay like a map of a stolen life. She didn't turn around. She just stood there with her hands still under the now silent tap, staring at the droplets clinging to the stainless steel. Dante tried to sit up on the sofa, pain spreading from his wound through his body, but nothing compared to the curiosity burning inside him. "The scars on your wrist," he said, his voice rough. They weren't self-inflicted. Olivia still didn't turn around. Her hand tightened on the edge of the sink, her knuckles turning white. "No," she answered evenly. They weren't self-inflicted. Silence flowed between them like a black river. Then Olivia turned and leaned back against the sink with her arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes looked straight at Dante without fear, without hesitation. Instead, she asked him, "Do you know why you were shot?" The question struck like a blow. Dante frowned, not understanding why she would ask that. "I do," he said slowly. "Victor, my cousin, my underboss, he betrayed me." She nodded as if this were something she had known for a long time. "Victor Moreno," she said, the name rolling from her lips like a curse. "Yes, he betrayed you. But do you know why?" Dante fell silent. He didn't know. He had trusted Victor as he trusted himself. 18 years. 18 years Victor had stood beside him since his father died, since he himself had been an 18-year-old boy forced to carry an empire on his shoulders. Victor was the only one he let stand behind his back without looking. And now the bullet in his body was the answer to that blind trust. "What do you know about Victor?" Dante asked, his voice sharpening. "Who are you to know these things?" Olivia stepped toward him slowly. One step at a time, like a cat moving toward its prey. She stopped a few steps away, standing in the dim room with streetlight from the window cutting cold lines across her face. "I've known who you are for a long time. Dante Caruso," she said, her voice cold as ice. "The ghost of Manhattan, Capo dei Capi, the boss of the Caruso Empire, the man who made all of New York tremble at a name." Dante tensed, every sense shifting into alarm. "If you know who I am," he said slowly, "why did you save me? A normal waitress would call the police. Or run. No one gets involved with the Mafia unless they want to die." Olivia smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. It was cold and sharp as a blade. "Because you're the only path to what I want," she said. Dante narrowed his eyes. "And what do you want?" Silence stretched for a heartbeat. 2 heartbeats. 3 heartbeats. Then Olivia looked straight into his eyes, and what he saw there was not fear or greed. It was hatred. Pure hatred, forged over years, honed into a blade waiting to strike. "The same thing you want," she said, each word falling like stone. "Victor Moreno, dead." Dante froze. He had heard many threats in his life. He had looked into the eyes of those who wanted him dead, but this was the first time he heard a waitress with hands rough from dishwater speak of killing his underboss as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "What do you have to do with Victor?" he asked, his voice lowering like thunder before a storm. Olivia fell silent. Her eyes darkened as if someone had just blown out the last candle in a room already dim. She turned her back and walked to the window, looking out at the rain still falling on the city. "I'll tell you," she said, her voice flat like she was reading an obituary, "but you'll wish you'd never asked." Olivia still stood with her back to Dante, her gaze piercing through the rain as if she were looking into another world. A world from 15 years ago. And when she began to speak, her voice didn't tremble or falter but flowed evenly like water dripping in a dark cave. "My father's name was Anthony Brennan," she began. 20 years ago, he was the chief accountant of the Caruso family. Dante stiffened. That name, he had heard it before, in the stories his father told, in warnings about betrayal. Anthony Brennan, the traitor, the man who had been executed for selling information to enemies. "He worked for the family for 15 years, Olivia continued, her voice steady though Dante could see her shoulders were drawn tight as a wire. "He was loyal. He kept the books, managed the finances, and never asked a question he shouldn't have asked. He was a good man, Dante, a good father. He taught me to read, taught me to count, taught me that no matter how cruel the world is, there are still people worth trusting." She paused, and in that silence Dante could hear the rain tapping on the window like funeral drums. "Then one night," Olivia went on, "he discovered something. Someone was stealing money from the family's fund for widows and orphans, money meant for wives who had lost husbands and children who had lost fathers in service to the Caruso family. Someone was siphoning off every dollar and every coin like a worm eating from the inside." Dante frowned. He hadn't known this. His father had never mentioned any embezzlement. He had only spoken of betrayal, of the need to remove the disloyal. "My father was going to tell Don Caruso," Your father, Olivia said. He gathered evidence and prepared everything, but he didn't have time. That night they came. She turned, and Dante saw her eyes. Dry. No tears, but inside them was an abyss of pain turned to stone by time. I was 12, she said. I was asleep in my room. My father's voice woke me. Wake up, sweetheart, hurry. We have to go. He carried Lily in his arms. My sister, only 7, still holding her worn stuffed bear. He took my hand and ran. We ran through the back door into the rainy night. I didn't understand what was happening. I only knew my father was afraid, and my father had never been afraid of anything. Olivia stepped to the window and laid her hand on the cold glass. Outside, the rain drew lines across it like tears she could no longer shed. Then they appeared, she continued. Men dressed in black, stepping out of the shadows like ghosts. My father pushed Lily and me into a corner and stepped in front of us to shield us with his body. He told me, "Cover your sister's eyes, Olivia. Don't let her see." But I didn't cover my own eyes. I saw everything. Her voice dropped, almost a whisper. One gunshot. Just one, but enough to change everything. My father fell. Blood splashed onto my face. Hot. Bitter. I could taste metal on my lips. Lily screamed. I wanted to scream too, but no sound came out of my throat. I just stood there watching my father die, watching his blood soak into the ground. Something tightened in Dante's chest. He had seen many deaths. He had ordered many deaths, but hearing a 12-year-old child describe watching her father be killed was something else. Something that made even the ghost of Manhattan shiver. And before they dragged me away, Olivia said, her voice cold as steel, I saw the face of the man who held the gun. Young, ambitious, eyes without mercy. He looked at me as if I were an insect not worth noticing. Then he turned and walked back into the dark, leaving my father dead in his blood and his 2 daughters in the hands of traffickers. Dante stopped breathing. Traffickers. The word struck him like a blow. You and your sister, he asked hoarsely. What did they do to you? Olivia turned to look at him, and for the first time Dante saw something in her eyes beyond coldness. It looked like a fire long burned out, leaving only ash and embers waiting to flare again. My father didn't betray anyone, she said, each word falling like a hammer. He was killed because he knew too much. And Victor Moreno blamed the dead man to hide his own crime. Olivia didn't sit down. She stood in the middle of the room with her arms hanging at her sides like a statue carved from pain. And when she continued, her voice held no emotion at all, flat as a weather report, and that very emptiness was what sent a chill down Dante's spine. They sold us to a trafficking ring, Olivia said. The very night my father died. 2 orphaned girls. No one looking for us. No one caring. We were perfect merchandise. I was 12. Lily was only 7. She paused, and in that silence Dante could hear the clock on the wall ticking like the heartbeat of a corpse. 3 years, Olivia went on. 3 years in a damp basement with no windows. No sunlight, no fresh air. Only darkness, the smell of mold, and the cries of other children locked in with us. They fed us leftovers, sometimes moldy bread, sometimes soup so thin you could see the bottom of the bowl. If we cried, they beat us. If we disobeyed, they starved us. If we tried to run, they did worse things. She lifted her hand, and her fingers brushed the faint scars on her wrist. These are from iron chains, she said. They chained us to the wall like dogs. For 3 years I wore chains on my hands until flesh grew into the metal, and these scars became part of me. Dante felt nausea rise in his throat. He had done many cruel things in his life, but trafficking children was something even he never touched. It was a line he never crossed. And now he was sitting before a victim of the very world he ruled. Lily was too young to understand what was happening, Olivia continued, her voice trembling slightly before she forced it steady again. She only cried and asked me every day, when are we going home? When is father coming to get us? And every day I lied to her. Soon, Lily. Just a little longer. Father will come. I lied to her for 3 years, Dante. 3 years of looking into my sister's clear eyes and telling her things I knew would never be true. Olivia turned toward the window, but Dante could see her shoulders stiffen and her hands clench into fists. In the winter of the 2nd year, she said, her voice now only a whisper, Lily got pneumonia. The basement was freezing. We had no blankets, no warm clothes. She coughed day and night, her body burning with fever. I begged them for medicine. I knelt and pleaded. I was willing to do anything, but they only laughed. A sick child doesn't sell for much, they said. Let her die. She stopped, and in that moment the room seemed to stop breathing. I held her through her last night, Olivia said, her voice breaking like glass. I tried to keep her warm with my breath, with my body heat, with everything I had. Outside, the snow was falling. I could hear the wind howling through cracks in the walls. Lily looked at me, her eyes no longer bright, and she said, "I'm so cold, sister." Those were the last words she ever spoke to me. Then she closed her eyes and never opened them again. Dante couldn't speak. He only sat there watching the woman before him describe her sister's death without shedding a single tear, and he understood. She had run out of tears long ago. "I held her body for 2 days," Olivia went on, her voice returning to that frightening calm. 2 days without eating, without sleeping, just holding her and singing the lullabies our mother used to sing to us. Then they came and tore her from my arms and took her away. I don't know where they buried her. I don't know if she even has a grave. Maybe they just threw her away like trash. She turned to look at Dante, and in her eyes he saw something even more terrifying than hatred. It was emptiness. The emptiness of someone who had died on the inside. "My grandmother in Sicily heard what happened," Olivia said. "She sold her house, her land, everything she owned to find me. It took her 2 years to find me, and everything she had to buy my freedom. When she brought me back to this apartment, I was 17 but older than any old woman. She taught me how to live again. She taught me Sicilian, the secrets of the underworld. And one last thing, what did she teach you?" Dante asked hoarsely. Olivia looked at him, and for the first time a smile touched her lips. A smile cold as ice. "She taught me revenge." Dante remained silent for a long time after Olivia's story. The apartment lay in darkness, with only the streetlight outside casting faint streaks across the floor. He had heard many tragic stories in his life, and witnessed many disasters, but he had never felt like this before, as if someone had opened a door to hell and forced him to look inside. At last he spoke, his voice hoarse, as if each word had to cross a desert to leave his throat. "How do you know for sure Victor was the one who killed your father?" Olivia turned to him, her eyes sharp as blades. "My grandmother didn't only teach me how to live," she answered. "She taught me how to take revenge. And to take revenge, I needed to know who my enemy was." She walked to the small table beside the bed, opened the drawer, and took out an old yellowed photograph. "My grandmother had once been the daughter of a small Mafia family in Sicily," she said. "She knew how the underworld worked. She knew every secret, every code, every ritual. Before she died 2 years ago, she told me everything she knew about the Caruso family, and she left me something more precious than gold. The name of the man who bought Lily and me from Victor." Dante frowned, the pain from his wound now only a distant hum compared to what he was hearing. "Your grandmother found the trafficker." Olivia nodded, the cold smile still lingering on her lips. "I found him. It took 5 years, but I found him. And I had a very interesting conversation with him before he died." She set the photograph on the table and looked back at Dante. "He confessed that Victor Moreno personally handed the 2 children over to him. Personally. No middlemen. Victor stood there watching us being chained like animals, and he took the money." He smiled while counting the bills. "Victor didn't only kill my father, Dante. He sold my sister and me like merchandise." "That's impossible," Dante said immediately, his voice sharpening. "Victor is my cousin. He has stood by me for 18 years since my father died. He is the only man I trusted." Olivia looked at him with a mix of pity and contempt. "What do you think the best kind of traitor looks like?" she asked. "Do you think he stands in front of you with a crooked face and says, 'Hey, I'm going to betray you now'? No, Dunt. The best traitor is the one the victim never suspects. The one who stands beside you every day, smiles, nods, and waits for the moment to stab you in the back." Dante shook his head, refusing to accept it. "You don't have proof, just the confession of a dying trafficker. He could say anything." "I have my eyes," Olivia replied coldly. "I saw the face of the man who shot my father, Dante. I was 12, but I remember. I remember every line, every look, every cold smile, and I have watched Victor Moreno for 5 years now. I know his schedule. I know his secret meetings. I know who he really is behind the mask of loyalty he wears every day." The room fell into heavy silence. Dante looked down at his hands, the hands that had shaken Victor's thousands of times, the hands that had trusted him with his life, now being told they belonged to his enemy. "You may not believe me," Olivia said, her voice softening slightly but still sharp as a blade. "But ask yourself one question, Dante. Tonight, who was the only person who knew you would be at that warehouse?" Dante froze. The question struck him like a second bullet to the chest. Only Victor knew. Only Victor knew his schedule that night. "And who was the only one who didn't show up when you were shot?" Olivia continued, each word like a hammer driving a nail. "Who vanished right after the ambush? Without a word, without a message." Dante couldn't answer, because the answer was already clear. Victor. Always Victor. That night, Dante couldn't sleep. He lay on the old sofa, staring at the peeling ceiling, but his mind was elsewhere. Olivia's words drilled into his thoughts like a worm eating from the inside. Victor. His cousin. The man who had stood beside him through so many battles, so many negotiations, so many long nights of planning. He remembered Victor's eyes whenever he looked at him. Always loyal, always devoted, always ready to do whatever he asked. Had it all been an 18-year performance? The next morning, when the weak winter sunlight slipped through the old curtains, Dante took his phone and called the only man he still trusted. Marcus Chen, 45 years old, former Navy Special Forces, who had followed him since the earliest days when he had been a boy trying to hold together the empire his father left behind. Marcus was the only man he let stand behind his back without looking, besides Victor. And now perhaps Marcus was the only one left. Boss. Marcus's voice came through the phone full of surprise and relief. You're alive. We've been looking everywhere for you. I need information, Dante said, his voice cold and sharp. Where is Victor? Silence stretched for a few seconds. That's the strange part, boss. He vanished right after the ambush. No one can find him. Not at his home. Not at any of his usual places. As if he evaporated. Dante tightened his grip on the phone, Olivia's words tolling in his head like funeral bells. Anything else? He asked. Anything unusual about Victor lately? Marcus hesitated before answering. There are some rumors, boss. For the past 3 months, Victor has been secretly meeting with representatives of other families. Greco, Falcone, Russo. I don't know what they talked about, but it seems Victor is holding something that makes them listen to him. Dante hung up and looked at Olivia, standing by the kitchenette with a cup of black coffee in her hand. She had heard the whole conversation and didn't look surprised. The Black Ledger, she said as if reading his thoughts. Victor is using the Black Ledger to blackmail the families. Dante frowned. What ledger? Olivia set the cup down and stepped toward him. It's a book that records every dirty deal the families have made over the past 30 years. Every murder, every bribe, every darkest secret. It was kept by Victor's mother, Rosa Vittorio. She recorded everything as a kind of insurance for the family. But 3 months ago, Victor stole the book from his mother, and now he's using it as a weapon to build an alliance against you. Dante felt the pieces sliding into place, forming a picture he didn't want to see. Victor didn't only want him dead. Victor wanted everything. I have a proposal, Olivia said, her voice cold and firm as steel. I'll help you take back your power and expose Victor before the Council of 5 Families. I know his schedule, his weaknesses, and how to get close to his mother to recover the Black Ledger. In return, what do you want? Dante asked, even though he already knew the answer. Victor, Olivia said, her eyes burning. I want to kill him with my own hands. Not you, not your men, me. That is my only condition. Dante looked at her for a long time. He wasn't used to working with outsiders, especially women. In his world, women were things to protect or use, not partners to stand beside him as equals. But the woman before him was unlike anyone he had ever met. She had survived a hell he couldn't imagine, and she still stood here cold and unshakable, ready to burn the world for revenge. I don't need your permission, Olivia said when she saw his hesitation. I will kill Victor with or without you. The only question is whether you want to stand beside me or stand in my way. Dante studied her, her eyes deep as a night sea, the faint scars on her wrist, the unmovable resolve in her stance. Then he nodded. All right, he said, but we do it my way. 3 days passed in the small apartment in Queens. 3 days of Dante recovering on the old sofa, while Olivia kept working the night shift at the diner, as if nothing had changed. During the day they planned, studied Victor's schedule, analyzed his weaknesses, and searched for a way to reach the vineyard estate where his dying mother lived. Each day, Dante watched Olivia more closely. She was strong in a way he had never seen in anyone, man or woman. She never complained about the cramped apartment, the exhausting work, or the scars on her body. She simply did what needed to be done, step by step, like a soldier in a war that had lasted 15 years, and that she had fought alone. On the second night, Dante lay on the sofa, almost fully healed thanks to his hard body and Olivia's quiet care. She slept on the single bed a few steps away, the thin blanket pulled to her chin, her breathing steady in the dark. The apartment was silent except for the ticking clock and the distant traffic below. Then a scream tore through the night. Dante jumped up, instinct reaching for the gun that wasn't there. The scream came from the bed, not a scream of fear but of unbearable pain, of a soul being ripped apart from the inside. Lily, Olivia cried, striking her head against the wall as if trying to wake herself from the nightmare. Lily, don't go. Don't leave me. Dante ran to the bed, and saw Olivia curled like a child, her eyes wide open but seeing nothing. She was somewhere else, in a dark basement 15 years ago, where her sister was dying in her arms. In the nightmare, Olivia saw Lily standing at the end of a long hallway, wearing the white dress she once wore, clutching the worn stuffed bear. Lily's eyes looked at her, no longer clear but clouded and sad. "Sister," Lily said, her voice echoing from another world. "Why didn't you save me?" Olivia tried to run to her, tried to reach her, but the hallway kept stretching longer and Lily kept moving farther away, fading into the darkness like morning mist. "No!" Olivia screamed, and the scream dragged her back into reality. She woke, gasping, drenched in sweat, not knowing where she was. The dim room, the embroidered pictures on the wall, just vague shadows. And for a moment she was again a 12-year-old child lost in the dark. Then she felt a hand on her shoulder. Dante sat down beside her on the bed without speaking. He didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't offer empty comfort. He didn't pretend to understand what she had lived through. He simply sat there, silent. And when she began to shake uncontrollably, he pulled her into his arms. Olivia stiffened. Her instincts screamed to push him away, to never let anyone touch her, to remember that every touch in her past had meant pain. But Dante's arms weren't like the hands of the past. They were warm, they were safe, they demanded nothing. She let herself fall into that embrace. Trembling like a leaf in a storm, Dante held her tighter, his chin resting on the top of her head, his breathing steady like a heartbeat. It was the first time in his life he held someone not for desire, not for power, not to gain anything. He held her only because she needed to be held. And it was the first time in many years Olivia let someone touch her without shrinking in fear. She fell asleep in his arms, her breathing slowly evening out, her body slowly relaxing. And when Dante looked down at her sleeping face, at the faint scars on her wrist, at her lips still moving with her sister's name, he realized something. He didn't only want to kill Victor for his own revenge anymore. He wanted to kill Victor for what he had done to this woman. On the morning of the 4th day, just as sunlight slipped through the old curtain, urgent knocking sounded at the door. Dante and Olivia looked at each other, both tense for a heartbeat before Dante recognized the rhythm. 3 short knocks, 2 long ones, 1 short. Marcus's code. Olivia opened the door, and Marcus Chen stepped inside, the former operative's face set like stone, his sharp eyes carrying news no one wanted to hear. "Boss," Marcus said in a low, tense voice, "something has happened. Victor met with the Council of 5 Families last night. He declared that you are dead." Dante froze. The room seemed to lose all its air for a moment. "Dead," he repeated, the word falling from his lips like a cold stone. "He said I'm dead." Marcus nodded, his face darkening. "He said you were killed in a Russian ambush, that he personally saw you fall and couldn't save you. He cried in front of the Dons, said he would take responsibility, that he would carry on your legacy." The council agreed. "The coronation will take place in 3 days. Victor Moreno will become the new capo of the Caruso family." Rage flared in Dante like a fire fed with gasoline. He sprang to his feet, ignoring the dull ache still in his wound, his hands clenched into fists. "I'll show up right now," he snarled. "I'll walk straight in front of the council and show them who is alive and who is the traitor." "No." Olivia's voice cut through him, cold and sharp as a blade. She stepped in front of Dante, her eyes meeting his without fear. "If you appear now without proof and without preparation, you'll truly die. Victor has the Black Ledger. He's using it to control the families. If you walk in there alone, all he needs is 1 word and all 5 families will turn their guns on you." Dante ground his teeth, but he knew she was right. In this world, truth meant nothing without the power to protect it. "Then we need the book," he said, forcing his anger down. "Where is it?" "The Vineyard Estate," Olivia answered, "where Victor's mother lives. Rosa Vittorio. She is dying of terminal cancer and probably doesn't have long left. Victor stole the book from her, but she may still know where he hid it. I'll infiltrate the estate pretending to be a new cleaner from a service company. You and Marcus wait outside with those still loyal to you." "The loyal ones." Dante laughed bitterly. "How many are left, Marcus?" Marcus hesitated before answering. 23, boss. Out of hundreds, only 23 still believe you are alive and are willing to fight." Dante sat down, feeling as if someone had punched him in the chest. He had built this empire for 18 years, given them money, power, protection, and now when he needed them most, only 23 stood with him. "At least I know who is truly loyal," he said, his voice dropping like distant thunder. 2 days, Olivia said, her voice firm as steel. "We have 2 days to get the book, expose Victor, and take everything back." She looked at Dante without hesitation. or die trying. Dante looked at her, at the woman who had survived hell and still stood ready to step into an unwinnable war. Then he nodded. Then don't die. One day before the operation, Olivia's small apartment turned into a temporary command center. Marcus brought everything Dante asked for, the things a Mafia boss needs to prepare for a final war. On the small wooden table by the window, Dante spread out the forged documents Marcus had made overnight. An employee badge from Sparkle Clean Services with Olivia's photo, but the name Maria Santos. A blue uniform with the company logo embroidered on the chest. A tiny earpiece almost invisible when worn so Olivia could communicate with Dante outside. A button-sized camera clipped to the uniform collar to stream live images to his phone. She will enter through the service entrance, Dante explained, his hand moving over the map of the estate Marcus had drawn. Rosa Vittorio's room is on the second floor at the end of the east hallway. Victor is usually not at the estate in the morning. He has meetings with the families at 10. That is our only window. Olivia nodded, committing every detail to memory. She had waited 15 years for this moment. A few more hours meant nothing. But as she turned away, Dante took her hand. "There is one more thing," he said. He went to the corner where a black cloth bag had been waiting and opened it, pulling out a dark red evening dress, silk so soft it flowed through his fingers like water. Olivia froze. She had never owned anything so beautiful in her life. "You will need this for the night when we expose Victor," Dante explained, his voice gentler than usual. "If everything works, we will appear before the Council of 5 Families. You cannot go there in a waitress uniform." Olivia took the dress and felt the softness of the silk against her rough fingers. She went into the small bathroom and changed in silence. When she stepped out, she stood before the cracked mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back at her. The dress fit her as if it had been tailored for her, the deep red setting off her pale skin and black hair. The scars on her wrists were hidden by the long gloves that came with it. The woman in the mirror was not the tired waitress from Max's all-night diner. She looked like someone else entirely. "I don't know what I look like without stains and grease," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Dante stepped up behind her, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "You look like a queen," he said quietly and sincerely. Then he took from his pocket a silver necklace, a teardrop pendant with a small ruby set in its center. He fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin, and they both stood still for a moment. "Why are you helping me this much?" Olivia asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Dante didn't answer right away. He looked at her in the mirror, at the eyes deep as a night sea, at the face of a woman who had survived hell and still stood ready to fight. "Because Victor betrayed me," he finally said, "and because you deserve to see him die." Olivia turned to face him instead of the mirror. The distance between them was only a few centimeters. She could feel the warmth of his body and hear his breathing. "Promise me one thing," she said, her eyes fixed on his without blinking. "No matter what happens, Victor must die by my hand. Not yours. Not Marcus's. Not anyone else's. Me. That is the only condition I need." Dante hesitated. In his world, a promise was more sacred than blood. Once given, it had to be kept even at the cost of his life. But looking into her eyes, into the burning pain of 15 years, he couldn't refuse. "I promise," he said. And the moment the words left his lips, part of him already knew it was a promise he wouldn't be able to keep. On the night before the operation, just as Olivia had changed back into her regular clothes and put the red dress away in the closet, urgent knocking sounded again. Marcus Chen burst through the door, his face pale as if he had seen a ghost. In his hand was a phone, its screen playing a video. "Boss," Marcus said with a trembling voice. "Victor sent this." Dante snatched the phone, and when he saw the image, his heart felt as if it were being crushed. Father Michael, the 60-year-old priest with white hair and kind eyes who had been with Dante since he was 18. When his father died and he had to carry the empire alone, he was the only person in the world who dared to scold Dante, dared to look the ghost of Manhattan in the eye and tell him he was wrong. He was the one who heard his confessions every week, who knew all his darkest secrets, and still believed there was a part of him worth saving. After his father died, Father Michael was the only father figure he had left. In the video, Father Michael was tied to a chair in a dark room, his mouth taped shut, his old eyes full of pain but not fear. Dried blood crusted on his forehead, a sign of a brutal blow. Then Victor's voice came, cold and triumphant. "Dante, if you're still alive, come see me. Alone. No weapons. No one with you. If not, this old man will die piece by piece. You have 24 hours. The screen went black. Dante stood frozen like a statue, the phone still in his hand, but he no longer saw anything. Then rage exploded. He turned and punched the wall, once, twice, 3 times, until blood ran from his scraped knuckles, and the wall was smeared with red. Olivia and Marcus stood still, not daring to interfere. It was the first time they had seen Dante lose control. The ghost of Manhattan, the man as cold as ice who never let emotion rule him, was now trembling for an old priest. "He's the only one who never abandoned me," Dante said, his voice breaking like glass. "When the world turned its back, when I was just an 18-year-old boy who didn't know how to hold together the empire my father left, he was there. He never asked for anything, never judged me. He just stayed and told me that no matter what I did, God still loved me. I can't let him die, Olivia. I can't." Olivia stepped to him and placed her hand on his shoulder. She understood. She understood more than anyone what it meant to have someone like that and to lose them. She had Lily, and she couldn't save her. "I understand," she said gently. "But if you go now, alone and unprepared, you'll die. And Father Michael will die too. Victor has no intention of releasing him whether you surrender or not." Dante knew she was right. He knew it was a trap, but his heart was screaming for him to run there anyway. "We have 12 hours, Olivia said, her voice firm again. "Enough to get the book and save your priest. We'll change the plan. Move sooner, faster. But you have to trust me." Dante looked at her, into eyes without fear, into the resolve of someone who had survived hell. Dawn came too quickly, as if time itself were racing them, and Olivia stood before the mirror in the blue uniform of Sparkle Clean Services, her hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, her face bare of makeup, looking like one of the thousands of invisible women who clean this city and whom no one ever looks at twice. The tiny earpiece tucked into her right ear and hidden by her hair, the button camera checked and ready, everything prepared. "Be careful," Dante said as she stepped toward the door, his voice tight as a drawn wire. "If anything feels wrong, get out immediately. We'll be waiting in position." And Olivia nodded without speaking because she had waited 15 years for this moment and she wouldn't retreat for a little danger. The white van with the Sparkle Clean Services logo took her to the Vineyard Estate at 7 in the morning, the mansion standing in the suburbs of New York surrounded by rows of green vines stretching to the horizon and a stone wall more than 3 meters high, the ornate iron gate opening when the driver swiped a card, and Olivia felt as if she were entering another world, a world of luxury and secrets built on the blood of the innocent. She passed the guard without suspicion. He barely glanced at her badge and waved her through as if she were just another ant among countless worker ants. Inside, the estate was even more magnificent than she imagined. The main hall, with a ceiling higher than 10 meters, crystal chandeliers glittering like frozen tears, old paintings in carved golden frames, the faint scent of lilies mixed with oak and money, and Olivia thought this is where killers live like kings. This is where Victor Moreno grew up learning how to lie and betray. She moved through the corridors with the calm face of a cleaner doing her job, carrying her bucket and cloth, stopping now and then to wipe a statue or dust a corner, and no one noticed her because no one ever notices people like her. The second floor, the east hallway, Rosa Vittorio's room, and she found it at the end of the corridor, the heavy oak door slightly open, and when she pushed it and stepped inside, the smell of medicine and death washed over her like a wave. The room was dim with the curtains drawn, only a weak lamp by the bed, and on the massive 4-poster bed, Rosa Vittorio lay like a skeleton draped in skin, so thin Olivia could see blue veins beneath the translucent flesh, the breathing machine hissing steadily, the IV lines in her arm like twigs in dry wood. Terminal cancer counting down every second on her wrinkled face. Olivia stepped closer, her heart beating faster. This was Victor's mother, the woman who gave birth to the monster who killed her father and sold her and her sister into hell. And she wanted to hate her, she wanted to loathe her, but looking at that dying face, she saw only an old woman waiting alone for death. Then Rosa's eyes opened, clouded and dim at first, but when she saw Olivia, they lit as if a candle had been lit in the dark. "My child," Rosa whispered, her voice hoarse and frail like wind through dry leaves. "You look so much like your mother." And Olivia froze because this old woman recognized her. Somehow, and Rosa lifted her trembling hand toward her face and said, "I know who you are. Olivia Brennan," each word like a final breath. "I have waited for you for 15 years. And Olivia didn't understand why she had been waiting or how she knew, and Rosa's cold hand closed around hers as she whispered, "Sit down. My girl," her eyes suddenly full of tears. "I have many things to tell you, and I don't have much time left." Olivia sat down beside the bed, the old woman's hand still gripping hers as if afraid she might disappear, and Rosa Vittorio looked at her with tear-filled eyes, her voice trembling like dry leaves in the wind when she began to speak. "I knew your mother," she whispered. "Catherine, a beautiful and unhappy woman. She worked in this house before she met your father, before she ran from the underworld to try to live a normal life. I remember her eyes. And you have the very same eyes. Olivia wanted to speak, wanted to ask about her mother, the woman who died giving birth to Lily. But Rosa went on as if afraid she would die before she could finish. I knew my son was a monster when he was still a child, Rosa said, each word cutting her like a knife. When he was 8, he killed the neighbor's cat, not in anger but out of curiosity to see how it would die. When he was 12, he burned the gardener's shed because the man dared to scold him. I looked into my son's eyes and I saw a void, a black hole with no conscience and no mercy. She paused, coughing, blood staining her handkerchief. When he grew older, he became worse, greedy, cruel. Nothing was ever enough for him. My husband, Victor's father, began to suspect his own son. He planned to disinherit Victor and leave everything to Dante. And then he died. Suddenly. A heart attack, the doctors said. But I knew. I knew Victor poisoned his own father to take power sooner. Olivia felt nausea rise in her throat. Victor had not only killed her father, he had killed his own. And your father, Rosa continued, tears running down her wrinkled face. Anthony Brennan. He was a good man, the only one in this family with a conscience. He discovered Victor was stealing from the Widows and Orphans Fund, money meant for women who had lost husbands and children who had lost fathers serving the family. Victor couldn't let that be exposed, so he ordered Anthony killed and blamed betrayal on a dead man. And you and your sister? Her voice broke like glass. Victor sold the two of you to traffickers to silence you, to make sure there would be no witnesses left. I knew everything. I wrote it all down in the black ledger. I kept it as insurance, as a way to control the monster I had given birth to. But 3 months ago, Victor stole the book from me. She wept, tears tracing rivers down her face. I'm sorry, Olivia. I knew my son was a monster, but I was too cowardly to stop him. I was too afraid, too weak. I let you and your sister suffer hell because of my silence. I deserve to be cursed. I deserve to go to hell. She tightened her grip on Olivia's hand, her thin fingers squeezing with unexpected strength. Kill him, Rosa whispered, her eyes burning with something like release. End it all. Kill the monster I created. It's the only way I can atone. It's the only gift I can give you before I die. Olivia looked at the dying woman, a mother begging her to kill her own son, and she didn't know what she felt, hatred, pity, or only the emptiness of someone who had seen too much darkness. Where is the book? Olivia asked, her voice shaking with emotion and anger. Rosa pointed toward the door leading to the adjoining room. Victor's study. In the safe, she said. The code is my birthday. The 12th of March, 1956. She smiled bitterly, the smile of someone about to die. He thinks I don't know, but I've always known every one of his secrets. It's the only thing I could do as his mother. Olivia left Rosa's room with her heart pounding wildly in her chest, moving quickly down the corridor, pushing open the door to Victor's study and stepping inside, the room dim with the smell of cigars and expensive leather clinging to the air, her eyes sweeping over the massive oak desk, the shelves rising to the ceiling, and finally stopping at the landscape painting on the wall behind the desk. And she stepped forward, lifted the painting, and just as Rosa said, a black safe was set into the wall, her fingers trembling slightly as she entered the code, 120-319-56. A soft click sounding as the door opened, and there among stacks of cash and documents lay the black ledger, a book nearly 500 pages thick, with a glossy black leather cover holding every darkest secret of the New York underworld for 30 years. And Olivia took it, feeling its weight, the weight of lives, murders, betrayals. Then slow mocking applause came from behind her, and she turned and her heart nearly stopped, because Victor Moreno stood in the doorway with 20 guards lined behind him, guns loaded and aimed at her, dressed in a black 3-piece suit, his hair slicked back, a cold smile on his lips. The same face she had seen 15 years earlier when he shot her father, only now older and crueler and more hateful. I have waited a long time for you, Olivia Brennan, Victor said, his voice sweet as honey and poisonous as a snake. The traitor's daughter. Did you think I didn't know who you were? And Olivia stood still with the book in her hands, not afraid, because she had waited too long for this moment to be afraid. And Victor went on saying he had known her from the first day she worked near his territory, that he had watched her for 5 years, watched what she did and who she met and what she planned, that he had let her live out of curiosity to see what she would do with her hatred, and that now she had led him to Dante and finished her task and had no value left, and he lifted his hand and signaled his guards to kill her as he had killed her father. But Olivia didn't move. She stood straight and looked into Victor's eyes and said coldly that she wasn't afraid to die because she had died 15 years ago, the night he shot her father, and she stepped toward him one step, making the guards tense and raise their guns. And she said before she died, she wanted him to know that he sold her sister Lily, who was 7 like merchandise, and that Lily died in her arms because he wouldn't give her medicine, died calling her name and asking when she could go home. And Olivia's voice didn't tremble, and she said she would make sure he died 1,000 times more painfully. And Victor laughed and told them to kill her, and Olivia closed her eyes. And then gunfire erupted, not from the room, but from outside the estate, like fireworks with screams and running feet, Dante and Marcus attacking, the guards turning in confusion, and in that chaos Olivia ran for the window, clutching the black ledger, Victor firing at her and a bullet tearing her uniform but not her skin, and she ran through the halls down the stairs, smelled smoke because someone had set the estate's armory on fire, flames spreading fast and black smoke rising from below, and Olivia was trapped on the 2nd floor with fire below and Victor behind her. And she looked at the black ledger in her hands and knew she had only seconds to decide. Fire closed in around Olivia from every side, orange-red flames licking the walls covered in old patterned wallpaper, devouring priceless paintings and turning everything into ash, black smoke rolling thick and bitter, burning her eyes and clawing into her lungs like invisible hands choking her. And there was no way out. The stairs were blocked by fire, the windows too high to jump without breaking her neck, and behind her, she could hear Victor and his guards closing in. And Olivia looked down at the black ledger in her hands, the book that held every secret of the underworld, every crime of the families, every weapon needed to control New York. And if she kept it, Victor would always have power. But if she burned it all, proof would vanish forever, and every crime would remain hidden. And then she remembered something, a gift her grandmother had discovered when she was a child, a strange ability she had never told anyone about. Photographic memory, the ability to remember everything she saw, every detail, every number, every line, as if a camera inside her mind captured it forever. A gift or a curse depending on how it was used. And Olivia flipped to the final page of the book, the page that summarized every crime, every number, every name. And her eyes raced across the lines. 10 seconds. She had only 10 seconds before the fire reached her, and in those 10 seconds she memorized everything, every name, every number, every date, every crime. And then she threw the book into the flames, and the black ledger fell into the fire like a bird into an abyss, its leather cover curling, the pages igniting and lifting into the air like black butterflies in a storm of fire. 30 years of secrets, 30 years of power, reduced to ash in seconds. And Victor appeared at the end of the corridor just in time to see it burning, screaming no, and rushing forward like a madman. My book, and he reached into the flames to save it. And that was his fatal mistake, because a gas line in the wall exploded, and fire swallowed half his body in a horrific instant. And Victor screamed, no longer a human sound but the cry of a wounded animal. Half his face burned, flesh blackened, the stench of burned meat filling the air, his guards dragging him away while he still screamed and thrashed. And Olivia had no time to watch him suffer. She turned and ran through the fire, hair singed, skin burning, lungs full of smoke, not knowing where she was running, only that she had to run, had to live, had to finish what she had begun. And then a hand grabbed her, Dante emerging from the smoke like a ghost, face black with soot, eyes red from smoke, pulling her toward a window, smashing the glass with his elbow and dragging her out. And they jumped onto a lower roof, rolled across hot tiles, then tumbled to the ground just as the main roof collapsed with a roar of fire and wood. And Olivia lay on the grass gasping, staring up at the burning estate. And through a second-floor window, she saw Rosa Vittorio standing there, not running, not screaming, only watching the flames with a calm smile, choosing her own end, choosing the fire to end the suffering of a mother who had birthed a monster. And then her figure vanished into the fire, and Olivia knew she had found the release she had sought for so many years. And Dante held Olivia, pulling her close, as they watched the mansion fall. And he said the book is gone, his voice hollow like a man who had lost his last weapon. No proof left, nothing to expose Victor before the council. And Olivia coughed, smoke still in her lungs, but she smiled, a weak, victorious smile, and said, "No, the book is here." And she lifted her hand to her head and said, "I read the final page before I burned it, and I remember everything, every word, every number, every name. I am the Black Ledger now." Dante. They hid in a safe house in the outskirts of Brooklyn, a basement apartment Marcus had prepared in advance for emergencies like this. And Olivia sat on an old wooden chair while Dante cleaned the burns on her arm and shoulder with antiseptic, and she winced but didn't cry out because her body had long grown used to pain. And outside, night had fallen. the New York sky black as ink without a single star. "Rosa is dead," Olivia said, her voice hollow. "She chose to stay in the fire." And Dante nodded without speaking because he understood that Rosa Vittorio had chosen her own ending, a death meant as atonement for years of silence before her son's crimes. "And Victor," he said, "he survived. His face badly burned but alive, and more unhinged than ever," and silence filled the room. Then Dante asked softly, as if afraid of breaking something fragile, "Why did you burn the book instead of keeping it? You could have had unlimited power with those secrets. You could have controlled the entire New York underworld." And Olivia looked at him, her eyes tired but still sharp as blades, and said, "Because I don't want power. I don't need money. I don't need people's fear. I've only wanted one thing for 15 years, revenge, to kill Victor, to end it all." And Dante watched her for a long time, and then asked carefully, "What do you want after the revenge is done?" And Olivia fell silent because the question struck her like a blow. Because for 15 years she had lived only for revenge, waking, thinking of Victor, and sleeping, dreaming of his death, with no plan beyond that because deep inside she hadn't believed she would survive. And she whispered, "I don't know," and it was the rawest truth she had ever spoken. That night they stayed together not from desire and not from loneliness, but because both needed someone to hold on to in the dark. And Dante held her as if she were the most precious thing he had ever touched. And Olivia let herself be held for the first time in years without shrinking in fear. And then she cried. The first time in 15 years that Olivia Brennan cried. Tears she thought long dry, breaking free like a dam. Crying for Lily, the 7-year-old sister who died in her arms in a cold basement. Crying for her father who was murdered unjustly. Crying for her grandmother who sold everything to save her and then died alone. Crying for all the years she locked herself inside coldness and refused to feel or love or live. And Dante held her tighter and said nothing, because sometimes silence is the only language of comfort, and some pain can't be healed by words, but only eased by another person's presence. Then knocking shattered the moment, and Marcus entered pale as paper holding a small box, saying, "Victor sent this," and Dante opened it, and Olivia saw him freeze because inside was a finger, a little finger, still bloody, and a small note, and she didn't need to read it to know it was Father Michael's. Victor had cut it as a reminder, a threat, a declaration of war, and the note said, "Tomorrow, Caruso Casino, alone, or the old man loses another finger." And Dante clenched his fist until old wounds on his knuckles reopened and bled. But this time he didn't lose control, and he looked at Olivia with eyes cold as steel and burning with resolve and said, "Tomorrow we end everything." The next morning, when the first light filtered through dusty curtains, Dante placed a ring in Olivia's hand and said, "If I don't come back, leave New York and start a new life and forget me." And Olivia looked at the ring and threw it onto the floor and said, "I don't need your ring. I need you alive. And Victor will die by my hand, as you promised." And they kissed as if it were the last time. And maybe it truly was. The 50th floor of the Caruso Casino rose into the gray New York sky, like the skeleton of a giant that had not yet been given flesh. The construction unfinished, only steel frames and raw concrete. No walls, no glass, only orange safety netting whipping in the wind. And from this height the city spread out below like a carpet of light, while the cold wind cut into skin like 1,000 invisible knives. And Dante stepped out of the construction elevator alone, just as Victor demanded, looking around to see Victor standing at the center of the concrete slab with his back to the city. But this was no longer the Victor he had known, half his face now hidden behind a white porcelain mask, like those worn at Venetian masquerades, covering what remained of the flesh burned by fire. And behind Victor stood 20 mercenaries with rifles and pistols aimed straight at Dante. And in one corner, Father Michael was tied to a chair with tape over his mouth, his old eyes full of tears when he saw Dante, his left hand missing its little finger, the white bandage soaked red, and scattered around them stood the representatives of the 5 families, old dons in expensive coats with tense faces, there to witness, to see who would win this war. "Cousin!" Victor spoke, his voice warped by injury, hoarse and full of hatred. "You have 9 lives like a cat, but I think you just used the last one. And you no longer have a face," Dante replied coldly as he walked toward him. "Take off the mask, Victor. Let the families see the true face of betrayal." And Victor pulled out a small silver USB and raised it like a trophy. "I have everything here," he shouted. "A digital copy of the Black Ledger. Every secret, every crime, and if anyone touches me, this information goes straight to the FBI, within 1 hour." And the family representatives looked at one another, pale and afraid, ready to side with Victor, if that meant their secrets stayed buried. And Dante knew he was trapped. No proof, no weapon, only 23 loyal men waiting below. Not enough to face Victor's force. There is no copy. A voice cut through the wind, cold and steady as steel, and Olivia stepped out from the stairwell, not in a waitress uniform and not in the red gown, but in black tactical clothing, hair tied high, eyes burning like twin flames, and she stood beside Dante and said the information still exists, in my head. And she looked straight at the family representatives one by one and began to recite. Falcone, 1998, waste disposal contract. You buried 3 union representatives in the foundations of the Brooklyn Bridge. Their names were Miller, O'Shea, and Klein. And Don Falcone went pale as death, and she turned to the next. Russo, 2005. Bribery of the Port Authority. You paid $2 million to a councilman named Higgins. He died of a heart attack a week later, but we all know it was not a heart attack. And Russo stepped back as if struck. And the Dons stared at Olivia in horror and awe because she was reading their darkest secrets from memory alone. No paper, no proof. She was the living black ledger. And you, Victor Moreno. Olivia turned to the masked man, her voice cold as ice. The final crime in the book was written by your own mother before she died. She wrote that you stole from the Widows and Orphans Fund, money meant for women who lost husbands and children who lost fathers serving the families. You took every dollar to feed your diseased ambition, and Victor screamed for her to shut up and raised his gun, but it was too late, because in their world killing enemies was normal, and killing civilians careless but forgivable. Yet stealing from widows and orphans was unforgivable, a betrayal of those who had bled for the families, and Victor's mercenaries looked at one another and lowered their guns, because they too had families, and they knew a man who stole from widows would never pay them either, and Victor screamed that it was all lies and aimed at Olivia and pulled the trigger, but Dante lunged, the 2 men crashing onto the concrete and fighting like beasts. No longer about power or territory, but like Cain and Abel at the top of the world, and Dante tore the mask from Victor's face, revealing the ruined half beneath. Skin burned black, flesh raw, no eyelid left, only a white staring eye in a skinless socket. And Victor screamed and rolled toward the edge, reaching for the fallen gun, and turned and aimed it at Dante and shouted, "Die!" And a shot rang out, but not from Victor, and Olivia stood 10 steps away with Dante's Beretta in her hand, smoke rising from the barrel, and a small red hole appeared in Victor's chest above his heart, and he looked down, then up at Olivia in shock, trying to speak, but there was no time, and she said, "He killed my father. He sold my sister. He sent me to hell. This was my right." And Victor fell, rolling over the edge and vanishing into the darkness 50 floors below. No scream, no farewell, only the wind and the silence of final justice fulfilled. After Victor died, Dante turned to the representatives of the 5 families, who stood there trembling in the cold wind, looking at Olivia with the awe of men who had just seen death itself, because she knew all their secrets, because she was the living black ledger, and because she had just shot a Mafia boss without her hand shaking. And Dante stepped to Olivia and pulled her into his arms in front of them all and said, "She isn't the daughter of a traitor. She is Donna Caruso, my wife, my consigliere, and the keeper of secrets." And he looked into each pale face and said, "As long as there is peace, her memory will remain silent. But if any of you ever touch us, she'll sing to the FBI like a canary. Do we understand each other?" And Falcone swallowed and nodded and said, "We understand, Don Caruso." And the families agreed to peace because they had no other choice. 6 months later, Max's all-night diner no longer existed, and in its place stood an elegant restaurant called Gianna's with dark oak interiors, crystal chandeliers, and a menu that made even the harshest food critics nod in approval. And Olivia sat at her old table where she once cleared dirty plates and wiped greasy floors. But she wasn't a waitress anymore. She was the owner. She was the queen, the large diamond on her finger shining beside her simple platinum wedding band. And Dante walked in and set a cheap paper cup of coffee on the table, just like the night they met, and said the council wants to throw a celebration for the new queen. And Olivia didn't look up from her inventory ledger and said, "Tell them I'm busy." And Dante laughed like a man who had found something more precious than power and said, "You know, I've never thanked you for spilling that tray of coffee that night." And Olivia looked up with mischief in her deep night dark eyes and said, "I didn't spill it by accident, Dante. I saw the blood on your shirt through the window before you walked in. I dropped the tray on purpose to distract Tommy and get close to you." And Dante froze because in that moment, everything he thought he knew turned upside down. He hadn't rescued a wounded princess. She had trapped a king from the very first second. And Olivia stood and walked around the table and sat on his lap and placed her hand on his chest and felt his heartbeat quicken and leaned down and whispered in his ear, in Sicilian the language that began it all, "Tutto quello che vogliamo, amore mio, everything we want, my love." And the war was over, and the world was theirs. And that was the story of Olivia and Dante, from a tired-eyed waitress with scars on her wrists to the queen of the New York underworld. And she proved loyalty can't be bought with money. It must be paid for with blood and tears. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is served with a cup of cold coffee. And this story teaches us that no matter how far life pushes us into darkness, no matter how much pain we endure, real strength lies in how we rise again. And Olivia didn't let the past defeat her. She turned pain into power, hatred into purpose, and found love and redemption where she least expected it. And if this story touched your heart, if you smiled, cried, or held your breath with every step of Olivia and Dante, please like and share this video with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories every day. And I want to ask you, if you were in Olivia's place, would you burn the Black Ledger to destroy the evidence, or keep it to gain power? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because I always want to hear what's in your heart. Thank you for walking with this story.